Greetings all, this is Bill Burke, and I'm very excited to bring you this latest episode of Blue Sky. But before I do that, I wanted to share this short announcement from one of our newest partners, the great podcast from Pushkin Industries, A Slight Change of Plans.
Hey there, I'm Dr. Maya Shankar, and I'm a scientist who studies human behavior. Many of us have experienced a moment in our lives that changes everything, that instantly divides our life into a before and an after. On my podcast, A Slight Change of Plans, I talk to people about navigating these moments. Their stories are full of candor and hard-won wisdom. And you'll hear from scientists who teach us how we can be more resilient in the face of change. Listen on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
From the studios of the Optimism Institute, welcome to the Blue Sky Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Burke, and in every Blue Sky episode, we'll be speaking to leaders, researchers, and thinkers whose stories and insights will remind us that there is always blue sky above. Sometimes you just have to get your head above the clouds to see it. When you ask people to list their concerns about our society today, many will include the idea that we've lost a sense of community and togetherness. Also identified frequently is a belief that wealth disparities and a lack of social mobility threaten the American dream. And when it comes to kids, many worry that too much screen time and not enough face-to-face interaction with peers and adults will inhibit their development. Today's Blue Sky guest is the founder of an organization designed to address these concerns and more. Barrett Takesian is the president of Portland Community Squash, an organization whose mission is to build an accessible community center that holistically supports and unites its members. This dynamic and thriving organization is based in the first Portland, the one in Maine. Barrett grew up a few hours north near Acadia National Park and started playing squash in the Boston area. After graduating from Bowdoin College in 2012, he decided to leave the private sector to pursue his dream of working in youth development. Starting with small youth clinics at the YMCA, he rallied the community to open Portland Community Squash, a multicultural and multi-generational community center, in 2017. I had the good fortune to meet Barrett a few years before that, as he was spreading the vision and raising funds for his ambitious work. And it's been remarkable for me to see what he's managed to accomplish in the years since. In addition to overseeing Portland Community Squash, Barrett also serves as the senior advisor for community squash at US Squash. He's Maine's ambassador for the After School Alliance, chair of Portland's Out of School Time Network, and a general enthusiast for community centers. I think you'll come away inspired, and who knows, after listening, you might want to think about how you can support similar initiatives in your own community. Now, here's my Blue Sky conversation with Barrett Takesian, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Barrett Takesian, welcome to the Blue Sky Podcast.
Thanks, Bill. Long time, good time to be with you.
Always a pleasure to talk to you, Barrett. So I wanted to start, before we get into your incredible work at Portland Squash, I wanted to ask you a little bit about your background. You grew up in New England, correct?
Yeah, I grew up in Southwest Harbor, Maine. I spent 10 years up on Mount Desert Island, and then 10 years down in the Boston area, and the last 10 I've been in Portland, Maine. So always in the Northeast.
And you went to a private prep school, is that correct? And is that where you learned how to play squash?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up alongside a barn. I had maybe 20 kids in my class. I think there's only like 30 kids in the school where I grew up. But then my mom remarried down in the Boston area. I got thrown into the prep school world, and squash was the best equivalent to the sport, throwing a ball against the barn, and ended up being half decent at it. So it opened up a lot of doors for me.
And you wound up going to and graduating from Bowdoin College, where you were captain of the squash team.
That's right. Yep. I wasn't a straight line. I went to college in California for a bit, went to Boston University, did continuing ed at UMass Amherst. I always like to do things a little differently, but I eventually ended up at Bowdoin, had a great 2.5 years there, and got that diploma, and then got to work 4 days later.
So part of the reason I wanted to go through that is because in most people's minds, if they've heard of the sport of squash, some people think squash is just something that you eat and not a sport, but it tends to have in its roots or its history, at least in this country, it tends to be more sort of in elite settings, a little bit harder to access. And so with that, I'd love to talk about how you wound up working in this kind of field. I think it started with Squash Busters in Massachusetts. Could you talk about that and then how that led to Portland Squash?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's funny. When I didn't know anything about squash when I got introduced to it, and it was a high-paced game. Really enjoyed it. But, as I got a little bit older, it had the one sentence to describe squash was this country club sport. And I said, that's not the most inspiring tagline for a sport. So I figured there had to be a reason that people were still playing this game. And so I really started thinking about where was the intrinsic value behind the game itself. And for me, that started with working with young people. So there was a great organization in Boston that was making college a reality for a few hundred kids every year in Boston, and which would spread to Lawrence, Massachusetts, and Providence, Rhode Island. And so I jumped in to really learn what was happening there. Had a great experience working with kids, left my day job at an insurance company and decided to pursue it full time. And then when I was bringing it back I wanted to bring the sport back to Maine. It was a cold climate. I thought it'd be a good way to bring people together. And there was some unmet demand that, provided an opportunity to create some revenue and kickstart a new organization. So founded Portland Community Squash. We didn't have the philanthropic base to drive like a pure philanthropic organization. So we didn't call it urban squash, which was kind of the vernacular at the time. We called it community squash. And the concept was, if we can bring all these people from different ages and backgrounds together in the same facility, surely we can fulfill a mission of providing opportunities for youth and pay the bills. Well, what ended up happening, we created something that was more financially viable, but we also created something that was much more rich in social capital. We were, watching the kids form these close bonds came very easily. But then the challenge became, wow, can we actually create some of this integration in the adult community as well? So
right.
All of a sudden, you start to challenge some of the conventional models out there. We were wedged somewhere between a youth development program and your traditional YMCA. But rather than having 10,000 members, we had, a few hundred members. So we started doing a lot of research and backed into a model that we call community squash, but call it community blank. We've worked with rock gyms in Memphis, Tennessee, and ballet studios in New York, and pottery studios in Portland, Maine. I think at least where I am in my journey now, I'm 11 years in. We have, a little over 1,000 members that use our facility every week here in Portland. And we've just created something that's extremely financially viable, and the outcomes have been amazing. So, happy to dive into what we're striving towards now. It's certainly become a lot broader than just college access, which is where we started.
Yeah, so I do want to go back a little bit more to where you started too, because you and I first met when this was still sort of a dream and you were chasing real estate and that sort of thing. You had a couple of sites, not come through for you. The plans fell through. And then tell us what you found and where and how you wound up building these courts, because I think it's a great story of perseverance, but also of physically centering this place in a neighborhood, in a community, not out at some strip mall or out in a suburb. Can you just quickly describe that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, just to really paint the picture, I was 22 years old. I knew zero people in Portland, Maine. I was introduced to, I think the first meeting I had was with someone in the Portland Chamber of Commerce. You pull on that thread until you get to Bill Burke, of course. You go to Bill's office. He's got his treadmill desk, which was the most innovative thing I'd seen at the time. And I was like,
I still have a stand-up desk. I have to admit, I did ditch the treadmill eventually, but I still stand up and down.
No,
but anyway, proceed.
You were ahead of your time on that and plenty of other things. The pitch was wild. I mean, here's a 22-year-old kid with no capital behind him, saying he wants to build a community squash center in a state that doesn't know what squash is.
Right.
Every meeting I had started with, what is squash, or is it the vegetable, et cetera. I probably would have done better if we had gone with a farming-based organization, to be honest. But probably, at least 500 coffees in the early days. We took 7 buildings to full plans until we found a synagogue that had great bones and 60 years of amazing history. And we started emailing with the congregation members. And the building was scheduled to be knocked down, and we worked out a deal that would allow us to take ownership and to make a lot of the necessary repairs to bring the building back into its glory. And it's just been an incredible home for us. It's in the center of the city. We have vans picking up at all the local elementary, middle, and high schools around the city. We provide transportation home at the end of the day. What started as a couple kids and a volunteer-based effort in the basement of the Portland YMCA is now, thousands of families. We've had 700 kids go through the programs. Our oldest students are all graduating from college this year. So, you stick with anything for 10 years and good things happen. I think that's one of the rare things is, when I walked into your office, would you have thought that I would have been sticking with this for 11 years of, just moving the ball forward a little bit further every day? It's just not a normal path just for my generation. Usually my friends are hopping job to job, and I might not be financially rich, but I'm certainly relationship rich for it.
100%. No, I believed in you. But if you told me 11 years out, would you still be in there? I don't know, but I'm not surprised. It's been a joy to watch you build this. As any entrepreneur does, Barrett Takesian faced numerous challenges when he started his work. One that he tried to tackle immediately was the notion that squash didn't have to be seen as a country club sport, and could instead be the centerpiece of a facility that attracted people from all walks of life and income levels. And as he looked for a place to build this center, Barrett often had to pull from deep down in his well of optimism, and several opportunities fell through before he had the chance and the vision to convert a local synagogue into Portland community squash. Getting back to our conversation, I wanted Barrett to talk a bit about the changing demographics of Portland, Maine. Let's talk a little bit about the demographics of Portland, Maine, because I'm familiar with them, but a lot of people are surprised when they learn what the makeup is of the city and the folks that you are working with. Can you sort of quickly describe the demographics, and then also maybe how that ties into your early focus on college preparation and just creating expectations for kids to go to college?
Portland, I've actually had the pleasure of sharing our model in 71 communities now. And so we, it's not a curriculum-based model, it's a values-based model. So our first pillar is access, which means you reflect the demographics of your city. And every community has to think differently about that. Diversity looks a lot different in rural Vermont than it does in Brooklyn, New York. So for us, when we were defining access in Portland, Maine, national origin comes, to the top of the list pretty quickly. In our program alone, there's 26 countries of origin, 17 languages. A lot of our families are coming from Central Africa, Northeast Africa, the Middle East, some of our, some Asian countries as well. So the needs of Maine as a state, I've gotten to watch. I just came at such an interesting time for Maine. It was, the oldest state in the country, and certainly one of the whitest, an aging population that needed a lot of help in healthcare. We had big shortages in healthcare, and that's where Maine said, let's try to make this a really welcoming place for families, a safe place, a place that really values education. And families found success here, and they kept coming. First with our Somali community, and most recently with our families from Congo and Angola have been some of the more emerging communities. But it's really turned Portland into this fascinating city. It's only 60,000 people, but you have every cuisine you could ever imagine from around the world. You hear every
Yes.
language imaginable on the sidewalk now. The adult community is still predominantly white, but the schools are minority white for the first time in their history. So it's for us focusing on youth. We knew the city was at this really interesting, changing point, and we didn't want to become a red line city. You see, I spent plenty of years in Boston, where you can point to a neighborhood and you can say which ethnicity claims that neighborhood. But in Portland, we're too small to segregate. Our schools are all integrated across ethnicities, and so it was really a joy to watch the kids come together and compete alongside one another. And now our organization is taking on that same charge, inspired by our youth. Can we do the same thing with the adult community? Basket of variables when you start working with the adult community. But the kids were our foundation, and just academic support every day after school, programs that focused on health and wellness, and then of course hitting a ball against the wall.
Right. So squash is in the name of your organization, but it's one of many things you provide. So students come to your facility, and then you also have this interesting model where if I'm a squash player as an adult, I can actually pay to be a member there. So you're getting some revenue there, but you're also, I think, a big part of your model is this multi-generational approach, and then also different socioeconomic levels are interacting. People from those different levels are interacting under the same roof, which is very unusual in our society today to create that. Can you talk about that, and then also how that's part of your vision going forward?
Yeah, of course. So you're getting to the second pillar of our model, which is equity. Just because someone comes through the front door, access doesn't mean they're going to stick around. So our second pillar is about meeting the unique needs of our membership so that people stay for a long time and hopefully get to our final outcome, which is cohesion, which is where you don't really need staff. People have built that social capital, and staff become less and less relevant. That's where you become really financially efficient at serving a lot of families. So in terms of becoming multi-generational, we really boiled our work down to 3 outcomes. The first is having a clear understanding of what the next opportunity milestone is ahead of you, and feeling like you have the support to get there. The second is your relationships. Raj Shetty, who's a professor at Harvard, right? He did the big opportunity insights, took on social capital and Robert Putnam's bowling alone thesis, and verified it without a shadow of doubt using Facebook's data. They found that the economic horsepower of your Facebook friend group was a 70% corollary to the social mobility of your lifetime. If you look at a map of the United States to see which communities are most connected, and you can look at this by zip code or also by school. That's how they presented the data. It's the same exact map of where social mobility is happening. So the next closest corollary was maybe your SAT scores was a 20% corollary. So there's just, it was just leaps and bounds.
Huge.
And this is what cracked open the mission for us. So many youth development programs were focused on math and reading scores, which is great. But in an after-school setting, you're not as equipped to take on those challenges as you are during the school day. But you're in a very strong position to make use of the hours after school and after work. It's where the whole community is able to intersect. So social capital became a really big thing that we were studying and tracking. And then finally, well-being. You're nothing without your health, and providing screen-free places with healthy food for families and the opportunity to exercise was obviously critical to the mission as well. So the nice thing about where the organization's evolved, no matter who you are, 50% of our families pay, 50% don't. It doesn't matter who you are, you're going through the same program delivery. We start with staff-led programming, things like after-school programs or clinics or mentoring programs that make sure that people feel welcome. Staff are making them feel like they have the resources they need to succeed. And then once you start demonstrating some autonomy and some of that self-determination theory starts to present, then we're trying to transition our families into what we call self-guided programs, which is when you're setting your own goals, you're finding your way to the center on your own schedule. And we find that that's the best way to equip a kid to be ready for college, is to create that community and individual strength. And it's also what we need from our adult community to become great, engaged citizens as well. So it's just really fun being able to track, Bill's progress through Portland Community Squash alongside, a new fourth grader that's finding their way here too. It's the same model. And it just goes to show that there's just some fundamental things that we need to be happy people in this world. It's such a unique opportunity for a community center to emerge. I mean, I think if you look at American history, houses of worship used to play an oversized role in creating these spaces, and they still do to a great extent. I mean, Americans are just as religious as they once were, but religious attendance is down 30% the last couple decades.
Right.
So
right.
I think the arts and sports just are an amazing arena to help patch some of that 30% slide that we were seeing. And we have to overcome. We have to be better than Netflix. Like, that's what our staff talks about every day. Like, we know
right.
we know what the challenge is, and we're up for it. It's just community centers. The brand of community centers is just as dead as the brand of squash. Both of them need a big facelift. And so, we've been really hammering out the nuts and bolts. We've been in our facility. We just turned 7. We're
Amazing.
Investing another $6 million, which I know is out of reach for a lot of communities, but we've just had so much success. We're purchasing adjacent properties and doubling the size of our center and serving a lot more families. But it started with such just a good seed 10 years ago, and this is where the momentum has led us. So really excited to see, we'll work with anybody that is building community. Doesn't matter what the hook is, but we think that building community centers is extremely important for the vitality of our cities and towns. And then we're having some fun reinventing squash too. We're helping out. We're going to be doing a lot of the branding. Squash just got into the 2028 Olympics. So we have some really bold ideas that we hope to launch leading up to the Olympics
very cool.
To make squash a lot more accessible as well.
People are usually surprised when they learn about the evolving demographics of Maine's largest city, especially when they hear that in Portland high schools, there are students from 26 different countries with 17 different native languages. This creates unique challenges and opportunities, and Portland Community Squash has done a great job bringing together the full range of the city's population. And if you're not familiar with Raj Chetty's work, or haven't read Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone, I highly recommend them both. In different ways, each of them makes a strong case for the benefits of bringing together disparate members of our communities. And back to Barrett. As ambitious as he is, it's interesting to hear the thought that has gone into not trying to do everything, like helping kids with reading or math scores, but instead focusing on nutrition, exercise, and social interaction. And now, back to our conversation. You mentioned college preparation, and you also talked about upward mobility, and we all know that the college degree can really set you up for success in life, at least in this country. But a lot of the students who have come to this country or come to your facility don't have parents who went to college. They might not be thinking about it. And it was a big part of your model, at least to start, that this would be a place where you'd help kids start thinking about college. And when you walk in there, you'll see into Portland Community Squash, there are signs above courts. Courts are named for certain colleges. Can you talk about that? And then also how squash is uniquely positioned as a way to get into college? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I think that was the seed of like the original urban squash model. Squash is played in a lot of elite universities. It's not a popular sport. And sure, we send a couple kids to top colleges every year because they're sensational athletes. But the college banners is tricky. I mean, a lot of our students are 5-6 years into the asylum seeking process. They might be coming from civil or civil unrest or even war. And as an asylum seeker, you cannot get financial aid to go to college. The FAFSA process does not work for you. So some of our kids, just for being outstanding students and athletes, are able to have institutions pay for their entire tuition, which is amazing. But that's not going to be the path for everyone. And more, we see students going through the community college system, working part-time jobs to pay their way through school, then hopefully getting into the university system, like University of Southern Maine, continuing to work and find loans where possible. And then, all with vocation in mind every step of the way. The idea of just going to college and figuring it out is a real luxury that a lot of our students that don't necessarily have. So, but for our kids to be in an environment where they see different careers, they just see so many different paths in front of them.
Yep.
And that's, as someone that's helping students navigate the way, that's all you can ask for. And I think that's how parents view it as well. They just want to expose their kids to different opportunities and hope that spark is lit, so that the intrinsic motivation is coming from the student and not from some external source. So we still, celebrate every high school graduation, middle school graduation, college graduation, certainly. But in terms of milestones, it's amazing. Just the percentage of students that are working now, even in high school, getting a worker's permit at 14 is more prevalent than getting your driver's permit. It's we have a lot of hardworking kids in the city. It gives me a lot of hope and inspiration.
And another thing you do, and we touched on earlier, but I'd love you to sort of paint a picture for us, is this interaction between kids, adults, kids from less advantaged backgrounds, kids from more advantaged backgrounds, adults from all sides of the economic spectrum. Can you sort of paint a picture? If I walk into the Portland Community Squash at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, who am I seeing there? What are the interactions? What's the place look and feel like?
Well, I think it's looking good, but it's not all the way there. If you came at 4 o'clock, you would see predominantly kids. Yeah, you'd see some volunteers and staff.
Sure.
But it's very kid heavy. It's diverse in the afternoon. And then at 6 o'clock, when the kids are winding down, boom, it transitions over to the adult community. And it feels like it used to feel like a pretty strong divide. In the last couple of years, since we've published our new theory of change and we have a new model driving things, creating relationships across those lines of difference is now imperative to our success. So you have so many more kids playing in the adult leagues in the evenings. You have, more adults coming to spend time in the facility in the afternoons, watching all the kids play. We're building a cafe right now that creates that third space as well. So if you're not intentional about crossing, about overlapping these demographics, you're still, some of that natural segregation by age or background is bound to happen. So all the new events, we have a whole new event strategy. We do 2 family events a week now, potlucks, exhibition matches. We have a more robust volunteer program. We're rolling out a cafe, like I mentioned. We're, better integrating the ages in our squash leagues. All the moves that we're making right now are all towards, mixing these populations, because to your point, I mean, we want our kids going into the world and our adults going into the world relationship rich. And when I got out of college, I have to say that they're just, I was stepping into a pretty segregated world, especially having the opportunity to go to prep school. It just put me on a course that I was going to be spending most of my life in affluent elite circles, which is a huge privilege. But it's also a disservice to just enjoying how rich this life can be when you really feel connected to all your neighbors and not just not just your neighbors that have leisure time to spend at private clubs. So it's just, for me personally, it's about wanting to live life a little bit differently, and hopefully I can create the spaces alongside our staff to make that true for a lot of people in our community.
So we've focused mostly on the Portland community. You mentioned that you've done some work in other parts of the country. You're helping other organizations. Can you talk about that? Because we probably have people listening who are thinking, boy, this sounds great. We don't have this where I live. Boy, I'd love to put a group of people together and maybe try to replicate this model. What else is happening around the country? What's been your involvement, and what advice would you give to people in other markets that think this could be a good idea for them?
You bet. I usually engage with communities at two different stages of a project. One would be when someone is inspired and has an idea to bring a community center to town, and or make better use of an existing community asset. The second is when it's time to actually operationalize it. So
right
on the first stage, it's location, because most of your members are going to come from a 2-mile radius of your center. So location is critical. Are you actually going to be able to pull together different demographics? Leadership, probably the most critical, who's putting in the sweat equity, and capital. Yep. If you want to serve a diverse group of people, I've tried working through public funds and used child care subsidy programs and that whatnot. It is very difficult to do. There has to be some component of philanthropy right now to really create an inclusive space. So it's a big charge. You got to run a business, plus you have to find a way to subsidize, half of your customers. So it's not it's not something to take lightly. But when I go into a community, I get really excited when there's maybe even an existing person who's running that gymnastics studio already, that we can lift up and celebrate and put some horsepower behind. Where is community happening? Like I said, I like to look at the arts and sports. I think it's just non-denominational, and it's just really great ground for all this work to happen. So looking for the leaders, who's been doing the work and has authentic relationships in the community, helping them find the right space, or investing in the space they already have. Maybe it's a gymnastics studio. What would that look like if we built on a little cafe next to it and kids could do their homework after practice, and maybe we added 1 or 2 more staff that were doing more community outreach. We provided some transportation, some financial aid, some inclusive marketing. How could we turn that pay to play after school program to be truly inclusive, and add the wraparound services, et cetera. And then capital, I've got plenty of thoughts on how to raise money. I've been doing it for a while.
You're good at it.
But that's an important part of the equation as well. And then when it comes time to operationalizing it, everything on we actually, everything's completely open source on our website, pcsquash.com. Portland Community Squash. We've got a really robust theory of change that has some really big names behind it. Robert Putnam's, Mr. Bowling Alone has been part of it. The Brookings Institution in DC has put a couple of people from their economics department behind our metrics. Meredith Whitley from the Sport for Development Journal and Adelphi University brought a lot of the academic research behind our interventions. So a lot of thoughtfulness has gone into it. So there's a great resource there. And then all the best practices from student safety to curriculum. It's kind of up to people to just grab it by the horns and implement it.
I'm glad you mentioned the website, because it is about as detailed and rich and, as you said, sort of open source and transparent and as any I've seen, for-profit or not-for-profit for that matter. So I encourage people to check that out if they want to learn more about what you're doing, but then also try to replicate it somewhere else. Barrett describes the kids in his program as hardworking, and I was surprised to learn how many of them are holding down jobs while they're still in high school. This could make attracting them to Portland Squash more difficult, but building a cafe and holding potlucks and family events is a good way to encourage participation despite the many demands on these young people's time and energy. I was also interested to hear Barrett talk about other work being done around the country and his belief that athletics and the arts are the best vehicles for bringing people together, largely because they're inherently non-denominational. And as I said, his website is well worth checking out, pcsquash.com. It's full of interesting and useful information, strategies, and data. To kick off our final segment, I wanted Barrett to talk about the challenges he faced in early 2020 with the onset of COVID-19. Another subject I'd love to cover while I have you is, you've been at this a long time, and any entrepreneur can tell you that it is a battle. And just when you think things are going great, something else comes up that you hadn't thought of. So I want to talk about the pandemic, if I may. And what was that like for you? So you've got this thing up and running, it's humming along, and then all of a sudden in March of 2020, the world shuts down. What was it like for you, and what did you learn from it? And did it impact the way you run the business now, that run the operation? And did you learn some things that moved you in a different direction with community squash?
Yeah, a lot of the innovation I'm talking about with you today is, all came out of the pandemic. It was a massive interrupter, and it made us all rethink the way we do our work. I have to say, we were just getting on our feet. I mean, we were kind of 3 years in, great momentum. The building was starting to buzz every day. And I said, I think I finally found a career that AI and the robots can't take from me. I was like, community
Right.
centers are the safest bit. We're always going to need community centers for as long as time.
Yep.
And then I just did not see the pandemic coming. So we went from being, the safest business in the world to the most dangerous business of the world.
Yeah, right.
People together.
Right. An enclosed athletic facility was not the place people were flocking to during the early days.
We actually, our membership kept their revenue going to keep us going. And we operated as a remote school for a year and a half.
Yep.
So squash courts became classrooms, and kids were in pods of 4 for the entire year. We still provided all the transportation. We just kept the whole thing going. So, everyone pivoted to the best of their abilities during that time. But I had this line that kept repeating itself in my head, which was, I'm going to make this pandemic count for something. So we had 20, there was so much loss, but we wanted to gain as well. So we took a plan to expand, which was on like our long-term horizon. Maybe we'd start talking about in 2025, and we moved it up to 2021 and had the community design our expansion and how our programs would evolve. And it just kept morale high. It was all these renderings and inspirational images. I don't think anyone thought that it necessarily was going to happen. But our staff is just so plucky. They just kept driving. And we, right coming out of the pandemic, 50% of gyms were closing. We put a shovel in the ground to double the size of the center. So we're halfway through construction right now. We'll open up in October and be able to serve twice as many families. So I did not want to go back into the wash machine that is being in a startup. But the pandemic had other ideas, and it's starting to feel like it did in 2019. We're almost through this next big push, but my partner and I are about to start a child care center too. So I'm sure there's going to be there's going to be another push on the other side, and on the other side. So I guess I'm a cursed entrepreneur. I've always got to be putting myself through these big efforts.
Incredible. And I imagine too, one thing that the pandemic did for a lot of us is it sort of made more clear issues that we knew were already there. For example, the economic disparities, and the schools shut down, and people say, well, you can work online, and then you figure out how many families don't have Wi-Fi or don't even have a device they can use. Did that happen to you? And did that fuel some of your energy to keep going with this project?
Yeah, absolutely. I have to say, there's no silver bullets in terms of policy. Relationships are what allow policy to work. So,
right.
I mean, I think one of the big things that came out of the schools didn't necessarily, they hadn't been in a lot of the homes. They didn't know if kids had devices or not. And the after school programs did, because we do, we do a lot of home visits. And so we actually brought the after school network together. We formed Portland's out of school time network. It's 67 organizations strong now. And the schools used to be a bit cautious working with us because after school is the Wild West. There's no regulations. Nobody's certified or qualified in some cases. But the schools said, how can we partner with after school? And it's made the after school program so much better too. There's grade sharing happening now with parental consent. There's better communication between schools and after school programs. Every family needed something different. But if there was no relationship between the city and a family, or the school and the family, it didn't matter how good the policy or the food program was or the technology share was. It was difficult to reach folks. The other part of it is just how resilient our families are too, though. A policy will always be will never be perfect. What's perfect? The drive and care that our families have towards one another. They find a way, for kids to be looked after. So when it comes to some of these big macro problems, the pandemic being a huge one, I always look local. Like, if you want to know where my blue sky is, it's like knocking on a front door and just walking into a living room. It's always local for us. And you connected me to, the person that's really a genius when it comes to community centers right now is this person, Sam Pressler, who you met during your time at Harvard. But Sam has a newsletter worth subscribing to called Connective Tissue. That's just a huge study of community spaces and social capital across the United States, content coming out weekly. So whenever these big ideas come along, or a new project is getting off the ground, I honestly send a lot of stuff to Sam, and that gives me the liberty to spend a lot of my time focused on just local day-to-day happenings here in Portland, which is my happy spot.
That's great. So as we wrap up, Barrett, you've been at this 11 years. Have incredible drive, incredible optimism. Paint us a picture. If we were having this conversation 10 years, 11 years from today, what would Portland Community Squash look like? What would Barrett be up to? And just paint us a picture of where this is all headed.
I think the thing I get most excited about, what comes to my mind immediately, is that the high schoolers and college kids that I'm working with right now, 10 years from now, their kids are going to be in the program. And, they're the people that are going to be at my dining room table, having dinners. And they're the people I'm going to be saying hi to when I'm reading the paper in our cafe. So I just like thinking about just the progression of each individual in our community, and watching just how much stronger a community naturally gets when it's held together. And in terms of the movement more broadly, I'd like squash not to be the country club sport. I think that would be great. It's not perceived that way anywhere else in the world. It's really kind of a U.S. dilemma that we've created for ourselves here. So would love to, just get squash back to being the sport where you hit a ball against the wall, and not the one where you have to put on all whites and go to a country club. And then for the community center movement, like there to be a little bit more razzle dazzle in the phrase community center, and see young people take pride in taking the title of community builder. I think it's one of the, when someone calls you a community builder, it's one of the best compliments you can get. So I think just celebrating that job title a little bit more would be great. So those are a couple.
Well, Barrett, there are a few things I enjoy more than seeing someone go from an idea and a PowerPoint presentation to building what they set out to build. And you are a unique example of that. It's been a real privilege and a pleasure to watch you build Portland Community Squash. And I'm so glad you took the time to be on the show. And I can't wait to see what you do in the next 10 or 11 years, because I know it's going to be great. And I really thank you for being part of the Blue Sky podcast.
Thanks, Bill. I just have to say, you've done some incredible things in your career, but I think one of your greatest achievements is just being there for the people in your friend group and your family. So I really admire the way you put those relationships first, and you're still able to go out there and do amazing things. So keep up the great work, and hopefully you're still spending some time in Portland.
You bet.
Yeah, let's get together soon.
Appreciate it, Barrett. Take care.
All right. Thanks, Bill.
Tough, unexpected challenges like the pandemic can set anyone back. But the optimistic Barrett Takesian saw in those times an opportunity. In addition to scrambling to find ways his organization could continue to serve his community during the days of lockdowns and social distancing, he also told himself he was going to make this pandemic count for something. And in the middle of everything, he mobilized his team to create a vision not for contraction of Portland community squash, but expansion. And notice how forward-looking Barrett continues to be. His clear vision helps him quickly answer my question about the next 11 years, in which he hopes to continue to democratize squash and be a community builder. As someone who's been able to watch Barrett Takesian over the past 11 plus years, I can honestly say that I would never bet against him and his team. I hope you enjoyed this blue sky conversation with Barrett Takesian. Before you go, we'd appreciate you leaving us a rating or review. And if you like this sort of content, follow the Optimism Institute on social media and go to our website to sign up for Blue Sky Weekend, our monthly newsletter. Until next time, I'm the founder of the Optimism Institute and host of Blue Sky, Bill Burke, and I thank you for listening.